the MIPA student advisory cohort, and we're just waiting for people to join us. And we're going to introduce our guest, Jeff Moffitt, to the kids as soon as they start piling in. All right. No, yeah, we got some people joining. We got Julian is going to be there, and Julie and Morgan. Okay, I didn't have them on their buttons. All right.
Julian, I know Julian.
From Grand Blanc.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, there we are. And Morgan King.
Hi, Morgan.
And excellent. Hi, guys.
Hi, y'all.
Thanks for joining us. And so we're going to start talking about design. So Julian, can you hear us? Can you say hi?
Yeah, hi.
Okay, excellent. Julie, can you say hello?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Julia. Is anybody with you?
I'm alone today.
Okay. And Julian, I should have asked you, is anybody with you there in Grand Blanc?
Yeah, my friend Lauren.
Hello.
Hi. All right. And then the next one down there, Morgan. Morgan, are you with us as well?
Yeah.
And you got anybody hanging out with you?
No.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for, there's one phone-in caller as well, attendee. And thanks for joining us. We got Jeff Moffitt with us, and it's this time of year, start thinking about next year's book. Like the people like me, some of you are wrapping up your book, but still thinking ahead, right? You got to start maybe pitching ideas for a theme, or what are we going to do different or interesting next year? And boy, do we got a guy to help you with those thoughts and those questions. We got Jeff Moffitt. He's been doing yearbooks since 7th grade, 12 years as an advisor, right? And then working with Jostens now. Jeff, thanks for hanging out with us. So Jeff, well, let's start it out with you guys, Morgan, Julie, Julian. Does anybody have something off the top of their head they wanted to ask straight away? Something you're gnawing at you?
Let me look at my questions.
Too, so.
Okay, something we were wondering is, how is maximalism design being used professionally and effectively?
It was funny because when I read that one, I was like, how am I going to answer that? But I started thinking about it, and it really I think it's in a lot of packaging and products geared to, it feels useful. So that's kind of the message. If you go to Target right now, you're going to see it in clothing and a lot of kids stuff, obviously, because of the bright colors, but even in the adult arena. But I would say mostly in clothing. But then when you get to thinking about fonts and colors, there's a lot of advertising that are picking it up on that now, and even television. I think it's just really starting where people are starting to identify that. But every day I'm seeing more and more of it. I was driving by a billboard and I saw something today that I was like, okay, because it's new for me too. So I'm getting used to it and looking to identify how people are. I think in a way it's filling up the space, but white space can also help fill up the space, which is what's hard about this, because we're saying you're designing all this, but then letting it breathe as well. And I've been thinking a lot about this too, like, how do we teach this? How do we make it look good? And you have to experiment. That's the first part of it. I think you also need to print it out and put it at 100%. And I know that I'm getting off of the question, but with any design, it goes back to what's your message. And if you can start and have a really clear message about your school and what's going to be special about the year. It's funny because really we should do the theme and cover last. Mm-hmm. If we could report on the year and then in May create the cover and theme, but I know that's not how it works. So we sort of have to predict a little bit. And so you start thinking about, what is the message? What is going to be memorable about this year? And then you build that around it. If it's going to be like a chaos year, then maximalism and a lot of stuff and maybe more fonts than you would normally use totally makes sense. But if you're like really clean and sophisticated for some reason, then that's where the design, it all really goes back to the message. you guys are creating a voice for your year. Y'all are the journalists. You're the keepers of the history. So what do you want the kids at your school a year from now and 40 years from now to look back and remember? And I think that's why message and story is so important even before design, because we get excited. I mean, I'm a design person too, and I remember, okay, what's our cover going to look like? But as we move into really becoming true journalists, that's the second part. The story is first. If we start with the story, the design should hopefully follow that. That being said, I know we love color and design and putting it all together, but if the design doesn't go with the story, it doesn't make sense to the reader. And there's nothing worse than them picking up your book that you've worked on all year and they're like, huh? Mm-hmm. So it's back to communicating effectively. And that's really what design does. Our job as designers is to communicate that message. If you look at, even television right now at the news, and I watch this a lot, like, CNN has a certain message. We can picture that. But then if you go to MTV, it's totally different. The color is louder, so it communicates to their audience. We instantly know what that product is about. And that's what we need to think about with our readers. Are they going to be instantly able to tell what our story is? And that piques their curiosity. I talk a lot.
No, it's good.
Run on.
So like, what colors would like fit the vibe of like the maximalism, like the chaos and stuff like that?
It's I'm seeing a lot of bright colors, and even like magenta and just really, really bright colors. But the funny thing is, we think about the color of the year and what Pantone says and all that. I don't care. Like, I want to know what it is, but I don't really care.
Yeah.
Because it could be gray or purple or silver for all I care. But if I'm on a yearbook staff, it goes again back to the message. And I really am thinking about that a lot, is emphasizing that. Also, I'm starting to question, like, are people expecting the book to be the school colors? And, for a while we got away from saying, okay, they always have to be the school colors. The cover can be whatever you want it to be. And I still think that's true. But I'm also, we're always changing. And I'm like, what are the readers at our school expecting? If it's the history of the school, I'm starting to question, shouldn't maybe be the school colors? And I don't know the answer to that, because if you have ugly school colors, I can understand why you don't want to do that. But a lot of really successful yearbooks are their school colors year after year after year, but the book looks different. It has a different feel. And sometimes the people that are buying the book, we have to keep that in mind. If that's what they're expecting, how do we answer to that? And so the other piece is, what colors are going to match your uniforms? When you've got pep rallies and student life stuff where people are decked out in the school colors, how are those all going to fit into that? I had a similar question a couple of weeks ago, and then I was studying color on Pantone, actually, even though I'm dissing it. But they had these color palettes that were based on nature. So like, there was this pink flower, and then color palettes that came out of that. So like light pink, dark pink, green from the stem, and this really beautiful color palette. And they had one for mountains and some other stuff. So I started thinking, what if we did that with our school? Like, what if you walked around your school and took pictures of memorable places that people passed every day? So this could be a big disaster, because some schools are really ugly, right, with brown bricks everywhere. But then you take the pictures, and could your color palette be developed around that, where it's subtly a reminder of the school? And I'm not talking about the school colors, but I'm talking about, like, maybe you have a really colorful mural. I was in this school yesterday, and they have this beautiful, like, orange and blue and gray mural on this huge wall. And I was like, that's where their color palette would really come from. Mm-hmm. So, start thinking about, what are the people walking by every day? And probably nobody's gonna be like, I love how you took the color palette from wherever, but they kind of understand the message. And then if they do say that, we want them on staff. So I hope that makes sense. Like, I think we get too caught up in what the color should be, which sounds funny, but it also depends on how you're using it. Because if you're creating a section color, or you have icons for color, then it's a reader service, and it's telling the reader, hey, this is the sports section, this is whatever section. But if you look at the kids in the background, hi. I don't even know if he knows. I should have had like someone like, doing an escalator. Anyway, I like it when you pull the color from the dominant photo. That idea of pulled color, because it matches. You could also do contrast. Oh, are you kidding me? He's lifting up his shirt. Can y'all see?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, totally.
I don't think he knows.
Yeah, no.
So, and there's a lot of studies on color, and obviously we need a starting point because we're going to introduce that early on the book. But what is your color theory going to be? And this goes back to, if it's maximalism, I think you're going to have more colors. But I would pick, maybe if you do a pull color from the dominant photo, then a contrasting color. And look at the color wheel. It's funny that a lot of what we do now goes back to 3rd grade, the first time we ever learned about primary colors.
That's awesome. All right, so does anybody else have a specific design question that they want to share? We had Jenny joined us, and someone called MIPA 2019 joined us as well.
And if everyone's quiet, one of the things of the questions that I thought was interesting was, how do you design with something that's text heavy? So my first question is, when would you do that in a yearbook? And there's a lot of answers to that. So the next piece is, okay, what do we need to do to attract attention? Because if it's a really long, in-depth story and it's about one person, their mom's going to read it and they're going to read it, but who else? And so I think with that is creating entry points. And so like a really well-written headline that captures the essence of the person and the story or the event. And then with a lot of text, breaking up the paragraphs. And I don't know if it's because of texting or what, but I'm seeing books where they have just an endless amount of text with no indent. And it doesn't have to be an indent. It could be, a row of leading between paragraphs, but something that splits up the paragraphs so when the reader opens that, they're not intimidated by this copy. That space between paragraphs or those paragraph breaks, I think something like subheads even between those. So you've got a really text-heavy spread, but break it up so that if I'm the reader, I can look at it and say, okay, I care about this. And that becomes an entry point. And once you get them in, they may go around and look at the other stuff. I think things like drop caps. I've seen some schools where they're bolding people's names that are in copy. That's another entry point because you think someone's flipping through and they're like, oh yeah, I know that person. And then they stop. And, I've said this a few times, we really kind of have to trick our reader into reading the writing, which sounds manipulative, but they're not going to read this long, and especially because I think one of the things we're guilty in your book, and I've been doing it since 7th grade, so you could look, I've definitely written the same story more than 1 year, but the stories are the same. I can predict what the homecoming story is going to be, so now instead of writing that story, let's think about being a storyteller. And so sometimes it's a visual story. The photos of the visual part that are the first entry points, but then what else goes with that? And a homecoming story could be a list. It could be a Q&A. We want to give every year the book something new. Every year we surprise our reader. The story is not the same. And that can be hard when we have, we cover prom every year, we cover homecoming every year, maybe we even cover a certain math project. So let's look at other ways to cover that. Copy what you see in magazines. I saw this really cool thing about net worth, and it had all these 20-year-olds that were worth $1 kajillion. But what if we replace that with the homecoming court, and they're all stylized around, and even you could talk about how much their dress cost, or that is a story. And then you have the quotes around there. So it isn't always about writing a quote, transition, etc. That has a place, but I don't think we need that all the time. Y'all didn't know it was going to be a writing and a design session.
Yeah. So, Jeff, what is one of the trends looking forward to next year? Is there some sort of a trend that they should avoid or maybe take advantage of?
Well, I think one of the things that Julian asked about was maximalism, and that's one of the biggest ones, is graphically having several layers. So you might have a photo that's a duotone and then transparency with that, and then text interacting with it. So that's kind of where we get with a maximalism. The other thing is, and I saw, Elizabeth asked, and I was going to put this in my notes as well, is it ultimately the content, and this kind of even goes back to the story, but the content should always drive the design. Again, that's hard because we're designing the book in the summer and then hoping to get the content. And maybe you do start off with your ideal of what the layout's going to be, or even a template, but when that content comes in, change the design if you need to. I see so many times kids try to put a horizontal photo in a vertical box because their editor gave them this layout. And I don't, sometimes we don't set up that culture where the 9th grader or 10th grader can come and say, hey, this photo could be used in a different way on this spread. Can you help me redesign? And so content-driven design is really, if you worked on a magazine, they don't do the layout and then get the photos. They go to a photo shoot and take hundreds of pictures. Someone else is writing the story, and then they put all that all together. In yearbook, that's virtually impossible to do on every spread. But once you have that content, be flexible. Let it change, and there's a difference between being exact and the same and being consistent. You can be consistent without being identical. And sometimes people get caught up in that because they're like, such and such rating service says we have to be consistent. But it doesn't mean identical. It just means it has to look and feel like it all goes together. I think it's like a family with 9 siblings that all kind of look, you can tell they're related, but they don't look exactly alike. My cousins are that way. I call them the Cabbage Patch family because you just change their hair and their eyes and they're all the same. But there's consistency. They're not identical. But it ultimately comes back to what's the content and what's the message. And if you put those things all together, that's when you have that dynamic. Throw away your template if you have to. Something happens, you get a great photo, and I, there's so many times where I see a photo that's this big on a spread and it's so awesome. Let it be huge. And that's hard. Even at my school, we had 3,000 kids. We didn't like having a whole spread about 1 or 2 people because it feels like it takes away from coverage. But that photo is beautiful and it captures the moment, then let it be the focal point. One other thing too, kind of that question about design, like trends, I think looking at designing headlines and becoming really good with typography. So it starts with, we have to know how to write a headline and a secondary headline, and then design that headline for the content. Going back to 1990, we designed a template and the headline was going to be 72 points and fit in this exact amount of space. So we wrote a lot of really stupid headlines because they had to fit this certain box. But I think now we need to think about what's the content. Yes, you're going to have a headline area, but then let it change. We see some words standing out. We kind of phrase that as headline puzzles, and you're putting the headline together. Again, you're going to keep your fonts consistent throughout the whole book, but let that content drive that design on every level. Story, headline, photography. And why do people look at books is because of the photos. And my advice is if there's one thing you can improve in your book, you want to focus on one thing, it's photos. Even the best books in the country have some bad photos somewhere in that book. And people, sometimes I know some schools don't have to sell their books, but we're selling a product. Our photos have to be better than the photos that they can take. So if we start with a beautiful photo, then the design enhances that. And it's not the other way around. And I think we get caught up in that. And this is what worries me about maximalism, is because there's so much. There's like illustration with text and photos, and I'm afraid that the photo and the pictures are going to get lost because kids are going to layer it with so much. And I got some assets recently and was sort of designing with this maximalism principle, and someone told me to start over. And that is kind of tough to hear, but you have to practice, put it up on the big screen, print it out, because we get used to seeing it on, this big on the computer, but what is it going to look like at 100% size?
So Jeff, in one of the emails earlier, you talked about doing things in black and white and doing a spread in black and white and still making it stand out. One, why would you do that? And then two, how do you do that?
I think that because we want to be different, like it used to be like, oh my gosh, we can use color, and we had it like on 8 pages in the book and it was so special and it stood out. Well, now the reaction to that years later is black and white is special. And so when you're thinking about a black and white, it could contrast with the rest of the book, but this one spread is special, so I want it to be in black and white. It starts with a great photo again, and some people think you don't have to color correct black and white photos, but you do. You need the whites to be really white. You need the gray tones to be correct. And so that's where you start with that black and white. I think also, even more than on color, the white space balances out the black and white photo as well. If you take a spread and it has color photos and one picture, even if it's tiny, black and white, that's where your eyes are going to be drawn. And if that's your message and you want them to, then you should go for it, because it really becomes dominant, even though it may not be the largest. I think the typography is also going to help a black and white spread come to life as well. I don't know when you would do that, but as soon as I say that, all you guys watching are going to have a list of 10 times that you would. So we need to think about how we're gonna make. I know, never say never, especially if you're a teacher. But so I think you just have to think about what's the dominant element. So if the whole spread is black and white, my first question is why? Is that and I do think it could be a showstopper. You're flipping through the book and you have these colors and all this, and then someone comes to this page and it's black and white. My mind is like, wow, why is this black and white? Why is this different from everything else? And it's funny, you're almost like, this must be really important. I think too, if it's a tragic event or something like that, that could be a reason why you would do it, but I don't want it to be depressing either.
So that was a good follow-up question. Some newsprint only prints in black and white. Are there things they can do for our newspaper people here doing black and white? What can they do manipulating black and white?
It's interesting because even like we were talking about a text-heavy spread, and this really goes for newspaper, is the headline design, maybe even having a pull quote within that text, and then some simple graphics. Maybe there's a line that's drawn to that, because even in newspaper, we can do things like have that third column of white space. I don't see a lot of newspapers utilizing rails as much, or bastard columns. Yeah, I said a bad word. But where you break up what was 2 columns into 4 or 5. So you really want to create this visual interest. The other thing is, and with the photos, I think too with the black and white, is looking at the face sizes. So if you have several photos, you don't want their heads to be all the same size. You're going to have some photos that are taken from farther away, maybe a close-up view, some single, onlys where it's one person, small group, 2 to 3, and large group, so that you get this visual diversity. It all comes down to having visual diversity. But it was funny because one of the questions somebody asked me is, what's a tip that always works? And I was like, I don't know what always works, but then I started thinking about it, and rule of thirds and things that come in threes usually are more visually pleasing. There's like a GMC truck commercial right now, and they're like nature says things that come in threes are more visually appealing. And I was like, why are they using that to sell a truck? Well, it turned out they won 3 years of these awards, but the fact that they tied into something that our mind knows, even if it doesn't know how, if you look inside a shell and the golden mean, and it keeps dividing up by thirds, it's found in nature all over the place. I heard once that symmetry is the devil of design, but then I've seen lots of great stuff that's symmetrical. So design is funny because we all have different feelings about what looks good and what doesn't. But designers aren't just there to make things look pretty. They're there to tell people what's important. And so the design says, hey, look at me first, look at this next, look at that. This is the most important part of the story. Designers are journalists. And they're adding to that story. That's part of the story. And that's why I think the design can enhance or detract from, and this is what's scary about maximalism. And if you guys aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, it's basically when there's a lot and a lot of layers. So that's what scares me about maximalism, and that it's not going to enhance the content. It's not going to add to it. It's just going to be a mess. And it might look cool, which is important, but what's the story? To me, the ultimate maximalist is Keith Haring, if you know his art, and it's filled up in colors and all that. But each one of those pieces had a message. There was always something in that art. So if y'all aren't familiar with them, kind of maybe do a little bit of research on that. If you know Best Buddies, that club, they use it kind of looks like that, little drawings. There's always something in there that's almost like a hidden message. So you're looking at those pieces, and he has a reason for using all those colors and not having a lot of white space and kind of filling it up. With that being said, the white space should be, that was one of the other questions. White space has a couple of different reasons, and one, it's really to communicate. One is to separate. So when it's farther apart, you're telling your reader, hey, this part and this part are not related because they're separate. When you have things that are closer together, it's because they're related. So you have a homecoming spread, and you've got the powder puff game, and it's all in a little package that's close together, and then the homecoming dance. It's still homecoming, but you may have more separation. The other way white space is used is to frame elements and highlight them. I think that, we're seeing more and more design, and especially with maximalism, where the borders, you may want to increase your border a little bit. Let your reader have kind of a mental breath by using that white space to kind of create a frame around it and let you relax. And that's why it's like I'm talking out of both sides, because I'm saying, maximalism is putting a lot of stuff on the spread, but make sure you have white space. And let me rephrase that. When I talk about white space, I often mean negative space. So it's like where there may just be, a background there or something that separates stuff. It doesn't always mean that it's necessarily white.
All right. So, Jenny, Julia, Morgan, or Taylor, do you guys have anything you want to brag about? Anything that you guys designed this year that you're really proud of that you want to tell us about?
Not really.
Anybody?
You guys have great publications. I mean, I love seeing what comes out of Michigan. And, I think sometimes in the whole national spectrum, they are missing a huge part of great journalism in this country. And that's a whole nother conversation. But I just see a lot of great things coming out from so many schools in different parts of the state. It's really neat to kind of be a part of that. And and thank y'all for asking me to do this. Exactly. I'm looking at some of the pictures or the questions. So one of the other ones was what my take on 2020 themes. Oh, this is a crazy one. So let's talk about that. Okay, so first of all, it is 2020, and our job is to tell the story of the year. So I don't think the people that are latching onto that are necessarily wrong. That being said, I've been in 5 schools already this week. It's only Tuesday. 3 of them have started with some kind of 2020 theme. I am letting one of them keep it because it makes sense with their school, but I'm just kidding. You guys do what's best for you. But, the other ones, I really wanted to push them and think about yes, it is 2020. That's an important part of the story. Maybe that's a spread. But does that capture the message of what's going on at your school? One of the questions I like to ask people is, what's special about your school? And kids always, a lot of them are the first one like, nothing, it's the same old, same old. But then when they start thinking about it, they do have some answers sometimes to push them a little bit. But so going back to that, it is 2020. I don't think it's going to be terrible to do that. I think if you care about awards and stuff, that's where the 2020 snobs are going to come in. So unless you can somehow stand out from the crowd with that, and I mean for real, not just think you're going to stand out from the crowd, then if you care about that stuff, I'd probably stay away from it. If all you want to do is make a book your school's going to love, they're not going to see the other 100 schools in your neighborhood that also did the 2020 thing. And so it goes back to that. I want you to, think about other ways you can say that. It doesn't have to be perfect vision, but it could be seeing is believing. I'm actually going to make a PowerPoint and just give all the spinoffs to when a school says they want to do that. I'm going to be like, here you go. And then, go. But because there's only so many ideas, but I saw a little teacher group that I'm in, someone brought this up, and, Matt Laporte was awesome. He's like, well, what about doing spreads like the coolest glasses frames or some other things like that? And that was interesting. I even then thought about, playing on the word frame. And so it's like frame of mind, frame of reference, and it may not be exactly to 2020, but you can incorporate some of that 2020 stuff. It is cool. I mean, you look at it, it's the same number repeated twice. So there's design ideas there. There was a school that did want to use the word zone, something about zone, and they were going to make the Z into a 2. I thought that was going to be very hard to read and carry out through the book. And by the end of the conversation, the students were like, yeah, because I think making numbers into letters is a challenge. Because it might work in one word, but how do you do it inside? What do you guys think? Do you think, what's the reaction that readers are going to have? You may not be able to answer that here, but just kind of think about it. And the funny thing is, I saw something that Justin's just put out that said 2020 vision. So, everyone's into that. Like, how many schools in your class months? Because it's 2020. So part of our job as yearbookers is figuring out what the trends are at that time and capturing them. So that's why there's a balance between being a 2020 snob and telling the story. And ultimately it goes back to what's going on at your school.
So I got lucky at Fraser. It's our volume 75. So we're gonna focus on the 75th volume. So we're gonna dodge the 2020 theme. So we got lucky.
If you go back to 2007, there are so many 007 books.
Oh yeah.
And so, but again, the kids at your school aren't going to care about that. They're going to want a book that is about them, that they're in it, and that they like. And ultimately, that's what you're doing the book for. Not judges, not me. It's the kids at your school. And so if you keep that in mind, like I've seen some beautiful, awesome yearbooks, but the kids at the school don't get it. I don't think we did a good job.
So let me share something with the students here. Just because what you do is important, and just to prove that, I got a call today from a member of the class of 1969, and they're planning their 50th reunion, and they wanted to use the cover of the yearbook as the cover of their program, but the printer was giving them a hard time. They're like, you don't own the copyright to that. And so they called us to get the permission to use the cover as the cover of their little pamphlet for their dinner that they're throwing. So even 50 years from now, what you're doing and what you're designing is important and cherished by you and your classmates. So I just thought I'd share that with you because it is important what you're doing. And so, taking this, I love that you guys are here taking your time and taking the thought to do it because it matters, and it matters for a long time from now.
And the design is also a time capsule of that year. So when those kids from the class of 69 go and they see that yearbook cover and those design elements, there's nostalgia there. And so, I reiterate that it is important. Yearbooks are important. Yearbook journalism is important. And you guys are journalists. I've worked in schools sometimes and they're like, oh, well, I'm in yearbook and they're in journalism. I'm like, you are journalists. So don't forget that. So I guess we've got, how do you harmonize infographics in designs cohesively? And then again, I think this kind of goes into that black and white. Some of the infographics and those things are what are going to pull your reader into the story. There are also readers that just kind of, go through and want things to jump out at them. And so that's where they're going to stop and look, and they may still not read the story, but that infographic is going to be there to tell them all the gist of the story, what it's about, without necessarily having to read that. And that's why originally they called them sidebars, because you have the story and then you have the bullet points on the side that went with that. So you kind of appeal to both types of readers. I think Betsy Rao used to call them like hunters, grazers, and it was that same idea of those types. I know some of you guys know her. So again, if it's newspaper or magazine, it's text heavy, and this is the same thing on website. It's creating those entry points, using that white space to balance it out. I'm looking at the question. So one of them was designing broadsheet newspapers that are text heavy. And so again, like we said with the yearbook text, having entry points on that spread, something for people to look at. You guys, I don't even know if they still teach this, but in journalism school, there was the dollar bill test for newspapers. And so there should always be something visual. If you put a dollar bill on it, something to touch that's visual, that's not just words. Has anyone else ever heard that, or is it just crazy?
I heard it.
Okay, thanks for at least saying you did, even if you didn't. So, yeah. Ultimately, we're visual. People are visual, and we have to pull them in. And newspaper, I think people think newspaper doesn't take design, but it does.
All right, Jeff. So working for Jostens, you see a lot of different books. You see a lot of different work. Is there anything you've seen recently? You're like, oh my gosh, I wish I had thought of that. Is there something that wowed you recently?
This isn't necessarily a design thing, but I was working with some kids, and they said, we were talking about what they're covering, and they told me that they're having an arts section. So like we have people, student life, all that, and they're like, we're going to have arts. And I was like, that's interesting. And they said, we have a sports section. Why don't we have an arts section? And so they're covering like theater, drama, dance, like all kinds of visual and performing arts in this one section of their book. And I was just like, that's a school that knows their readers because they're caring about them, and there's no reason why we can't do that. So that, to me, that's the biggest wow factor. Every day I'm getting books in my house, and that's so much fun. And seeing what they're doing and what's going on. I don't know if can really say, like, I don't want to say any schools yet anyway, because I haven't seen them all. So I have a hard time answering that question. Surprisingly, I don't have an opinion about something because I think it's different for every school. And I want to look and find out. To me, that's where the wow factor is. So I guess I do have an opinion, is when the message makes sense. So for example, from this week, I'm working with a school, and we were just talking about it, and they told me this little saying that's written on a wall somewhere, and there were words from that, and I was like, well, there's your theme. That captures everything that you told me about your school. Just pull out these 2 words, and there's your theme. and it's perfect for them. The theme itself is not an original theme that no one's ever done, but the fact that it pulls 2 words out of this saying that all the kids in their school recognize, and their school's an older school, more than 50 years, and those kids that went there recognize it, their community recognize it. That is a book that tells the story of the school. And that's what excites me as a yearbook journalist and as a designer and storyteller. I think if you guys can do that, that's where the beauty is.
All right. Anybody have any more direct questions?
I have one.
All right.
Okay, so yesterday we presented we have different groups in our hours, and each one came up with a theme. And something all of ours had in common was like our colors were like mellow and kind of muted. So we weren't really sure like what design aspect to take with that, because we're all also interested in maximalism, but we don't really think that fits maximalism. It's more like kind of minimalistic.
Yeah, I agree with you. Even though, the Pantone color of the year was living coral and it's kind of this orange, I'm seeing a lot more of the orangish take on that than the peach. And so I would really study that a little bit, but that's not to say it wouldn't work. And I have a couple of examples in mind where I've seen some of those pastels or muted colors still be part of maximalism. But my first thought is, shouldn't it be bright?
Yeah.
The funny thing is, there's rules that you need to know, but if you have a good reason for breaking it, then break it. I want to know why. Saying that it's pretty or I liked it for me is not really enough. Find a reason to justify why that works visually as part of the story. That being said, you have to like it. You have to like your theme, you have to like your cover, you have to like your design, because you got to live with it all year. And when it comes out, if you don't like it and the kids ask you about it, why did you do it? I want you guys to have fun. It's hard work, but I want the process to be where you're enjoying the work. There's some fun elements. The book comes out, your readers are excited about it, they're having fun with it.
So Jeff, if people want to pick your brain, right? Are you available for people to pick your brain?
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, anytime you guys want to ask me questions, you can email me. It's probably the easiest thing to do. You could text me too. I'm traveling a lot, so I will answer ideas. I love finding ideas and looking at things. Or if you want feedback, I have schools that send me, kind of like what Julian was talking about, the projects. I have a couple of schools that videotape their presentations to the class and they send them to me and then see what I think. They know that I'll tell them. So if you want me to say it looks pretty, then tell me that. Sometimes we need that. Sometimes there's someone on your staff that's struggling and you need me to look at something and tell them that it looks great. Then they see that and like someone from the outside noticed something I did. Because y'all, every book has something good. Every spread has something good. You just may not see it right away because we're so much looking for these certain scholastic journalism standards that are really important. But every kid that works on the book needs to feel like what they did was special. And that's where we become part of the team. Is because you can appreciate, I know there's people that can't do a design like Julian can, but they can do something.
Right on.
So,
all right, you guys. So, Jeff, thanks for taking the time and chatting with us. Jeremy and Elizabeth, thank you for putting it together. And Julian, Julie, Jenny, Morgan, Taylor, the two people on the phone.
Sorry, you're welcome. Please send them my email address. So if they do have questions, I'll be happy to. I love it. I love seeing what you guys are doing. Y'all have ideas. I mean, even these questions, I've been thinking about them, and I'm going to keep on thinking about them even days after this. Like I might have a better answer or a different answer at the end of the week about some of the questions because, I am always analyzing and thinking, okay, could this be better? So.
Right. They talk in a
Cutting
group
you off.
me. No, you're good. They talk in a group me, and then we just put your email into the group me, so they'll have it in there, and they'll be able to reach out to you and pick your brain.
Awesome. I love it.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you all.
All right.
Have a good day.
Take it easy.
Thanks.
Bye.